Welcome to the Pro Aging Podcast. I'm Steve Gurney, founder of the Positive Aging Community. We're excited that you can join us for our interactive discussions with pioneers and thought leaders on a wide variety of topics related to aging and longevity. We're able to bring these discussions to you along with copies of the Positive Aging Sourcebook, thanks to the support of our Positive Aging Community Champions. Visit proaging.com to connect with them and find hundreds of other resources. Today we had a discussion with Sydney Palinkas, who's the RAFT Dementia Education and Outreach Coordinator. She explores fostering new skills and managing challenging behaviors to decrease stress for individuals living with dementia and their care partners. So let's jump into the discussion with Sydney. And I gotta let our YouTube and LinkedIn people in. All right. I am really looking forward to our discussion today for two reasons. Number one, we're going to learn about a free program in the state of Virginia that is that we want everybody to know about. But the other reason is that we're going to learn some solutions and some tips on how to help people who have dementia or challenging behaviors. And that this topic always is a great discussion. And so let me welcome Sydney Palinkas, who's with the RAFT program, which stands for Regional Older Adult Facility Team.
Yes, it's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, we're going to learn more about that in a bit. But before we dive into that discussion, Sydney, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let's get into this conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon or good morning if you're joining us from across the coast. My name is Sydney Palinkas. I am a social worker working with the RAFT program, and I've been with them since about November of this past year. So still pretty new because our program is still pretty new as well. Previously, I was working with the Elder Safe Center at Charles E. Smith Life Communities up in Maryland. So serving older adults that had experienced some form of abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation. I really, really loved that work. And before that, I was working with the National Network to End Domestic Violence.
Wow. Well, you've really got a great breadth of experience that you can share with us. And folks, you know, even though the topic says dementia and reframing challenging behaviors, we go down a lot of rabbit holes in these discussions, and it's because it's you in the audience. And so feel free to type into chat. I gotta make a quick adjustment there. Feel free to type into chat or to ask questions at any point in time throughout our discussion today. And I'll relay those to Sydney. And then Sydney, I think you've got some PowerPoints that you put together. And I think first we're gonna learn more about the RAFT program, and then we're going to dive into some solutions for, reframing challenging behaviors. But for folks that are not in the state of Virginia, don't jump off just because we've got a representative from Virginia, because I want you to learn about this innovative program. There are some phone numbers we can give you to call if you're looking for a program like this in another state. But if there's not something like this in another state, you might reach out to Sydney, and perhaps we can get it going in your state with their help. So let's jump into the discussion, and feel free to share your screen there, Sydney.
All right. So share the screen here so you can all see more than just my face as I'm chatting. Yep. All right, so I'm going to share with you a little bit about the RAFT program. So as Steve said, RAFT is the Regional Older Adults Facility Mental Health Support Team. So a big mouthful there, which is why we go by RAFT. We are a program of the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. So a regional project of them in Northern Virginia. So that's our service area. Our clinical program started actually 14 years ago, supporting older adults with serious mental illness and dementia with challenging behaviors. and helping to discharge those folks from the state psychiatric hospitals to partner nursing homes and partner assisted livings. So they bring those folks to those facilities and then provide long-term mental health support to the individuals and support and training to the facilities. Our team has a 98% success rate in preventing rehospitalizations at state psychiatric hospitals, which we're really proud of. And referrals for this program come through the community service boards and from our partner senior living facilities. So this program has been in existence for a long time, pretty well known in the community. But we're really excited. We just launched a new program out of RAFT, the RAFT Dementia Support Program. So we just launched in January, so still hot off the presses. And we are serving older adults living with dementia and their caregivers out in the community, in their own homes or in the homes of a caregiver. This is a short-term program, so we're working with families for about 2 to 3 months, and that's very flexible. So sometimes it is a little bit longer, sometimes a little bit shorter, just depending on the families. We're working with them right in their homes, providing education and support to families around dementia, around challenging behaviors, and really hoping to build up that caregiver resilience, reduce that stress, and allow that person to stay at home successfully. And all the services are free. So I'm sure for those of you in the aging field, none of this is going to be a big surprise, but this is why our program was funded. We know that 1 in 10 older adults are living with dementia, and that number is just growing. Caregivers are experiencing extremely high rates of stress. I get calls often doing intake of caregivers that are in tears, looking for resources. Caregivers needing to call emergency numbers, crisis lines, dropping their loved one off at the emergency room because they're just not able to handle this role. And here in Virginia, we're seeing a big increase of folks with dementia ending up in state psychiatric hospitals. So this is often not an appropriate setting for them. It can really limit the number of senior living communities that will accept folks after being in these hospitals. Here in Virginia, actually 57% of older adults that are hospitalized in a state psychiatric hospital have a primary diagnosis of dementia. And they're staying an average length of stay of 229 days, which is 3.5 times longer than traditional patients. So we are working across all of Northern Virginia, hoping to build a Northern Virginia dementia stakeholders group. There's just so many people in this area that are doing this work, and we want to make sure that we're all talking together and we're all collaborating. And we have an awesome comprehensive resource list for families of resources related to aging, related to mental health, related to dementia in this Northern Virginia area. So this is what our services would actually look like. One of our awesome trained dementia specialists would work with families right in their homes, help them identify what are some of those big challenges? What are those big areas of concern? Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're a little bit smaller. Really just depends on what they're coming in with. Whatever is making this caregiver say, whew, I'm not sure if I can handle this. I don't know if I can keep this person at home. I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay healthy and okay mentally if I continue providing care. And then providing really individualized education and training to that family, to the caregivers, and sometimes even to the person living with dementia, depending on how progressed they are in the disease. Connecting them to resources, to services, working on non-pharmacological interventions. Sometimes this is very creative work, figuring out how we can have this person be happy and successful and living a meaningful life at home, even with dementia. And then ultimately planning to prevent crisis. So our overall goal is keeping folks out of that state psychiatric hospital. But I always say on the river there of prevention, we are trying to get people far upstream, so they're never really reaching that crisis point. So this is the eligibility for the program. People need to be a resident of one of the 5 counties of Northern Virginia. So Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, Loudoun, or Prince William. They need to be either 65 years and older, or starting July 1st, we'll be able to serve folks that are 55 years and older. They need to have a diagnosis of dementia or be exhibiting symptoms of dementia, and then we can work with them to get that diagnosis. And they do need to be living in the community, either in their own home, the home of a family member or a caregiver. And I get this question a lot. Independent living settings do count as in the community. And referrals can come from absolutely anyone. It can come from professionals, family members, caregivers, neighbors, really anyone who wants to support this family. So feel free to fill out our form online. It just asks some basic information about the client, about the caregivers, about some of the things that are going on in the home. But if that form, for whatever reason, is not accessible to someone just technology-wise, or it feels too daunting, you can always give me a call directly and we can go through that over the phone. All right, so I'm going to stop my share, see if there are any questions or comments about the program.
Yeah, nothing as of yet, but I'm curious. What's the backstory on getting a program like this approved by the state? It seems wonderful, in this age where the growth of older adults and the incidence of dementia are increasing. How'd you all pull this off to create this program?
Well, I cannot take any of the credit for that because I was not here for that piece, but I do know that our program was actually modeled after a program in Kansas. It was called the Kansas Bridge Project. Their pilot has sadly ended, but that's what we were modeled after originally. And I think we were just seeing that there are so many folks, were coming out of the state psychiatric hospitals, were ending up there, that needed support in the community. So there was a little bit of a gap in what the original clinical program was able to do. So we wanted to open this up for those folks that were still in the community.
Great. That sounds awesome. So okay. So now we've got we know all about RAFT and this amazing program, and you're leading this element of it. So nobody better than to talk about some things that we can do to handle reframing aging. Now, of course, this always happens.
Yes.
There's no questions, then they start coming in. First is my good friend Pamela Mills, who says, sounds like a wonderful program. Is the goal to find the best ways to support the person to continue to live at home through resources? Would the dementia specialist make referrals to residential community?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think our overall goal is to have that person be in the best setting for them. So our program is serving folks that are in the community. And if that is the goal of the individual and their family, we're going to try to connect them to everything we can to make that possible. If that turns out not to be the best setting, we can help them a little bit in that process. We're not able to make direct referrals to residential communities, especially because we are government, but we can help them a little bit in that process and some things to consider and all of yes. And you have the source book.
Yeah. So, but great. And then Diane says, this is actually a really good question for a program like this. I'm in Fairfax, but my parents are in Fauquier County. Is there a program we can connect to help mom with dementia and my father because he's the caregiver? So is there a way for them to kind of work with you, even though Fauquier might not be one of those counties that you mentioned?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one, I don't know specific programs that are in Fauquier County. Of course, always connecting to your area agency on aging is going to be the best bet. But you as their, caregiver or their child are in Fairfax, which is in our region. So Diane, you would be definitely welcome to reach out and we can chat with you. I'm happy to provide consultation.
That's great. I was hoping you were going to say something like that.
Yes.
So that's fantastic. Okay. All right. Well, let's dive into the heart of your program, which is giving us some tips.
All right. So I'm just going to start off and make sure we're all kind of on the same page here when we talk about dementia, of what we're actually talking about. I think there's a lot of myths and misconceptions out there about what dementia actually is and what it involves. So first off, we know that dementia is not just one disease. It's actually an umbrella term that's used to describe a range of different symptoms associated with cognitive impairment, and it includes a lot of different conditions and diseases. So Alzheimer's is the one that we all hear about the most and we all talk about the most, and sometimes is used interchangeably with the term dementia, but that's actually incorrect. So Alzheimer's is just one type of dementia. We also have vascular dementia, Lewy bodies dementia, frontal temporal lobe dementia, dementia with Parkinson's, and many, many, many more. So all of these dementias present a little bit differently. So if you have a loved one who was recently diagnosed with dementia, knowing the specific type can be helpful. But we also know that a lot of people are diagnosed with mixed dementias. So a couple of these different types, which makes things all the more complicated when we're trying to serve someone. And a big, big thing to remember is that dementia is not a normal part of growing older. It is not inevitable. Not all older adults are going to get dementia. So the changes that we see that are connected to dementia are not parts of normal aging. And one of the big questions I get often when talking to anybody, but especially older adults, is when do I know if my memory loss is a problem or that I need to go to my doctor, or when is it just normal? When is it okay? You know, people talk about, I go into my kitchen sometimes and I forget what I'm doing in there, or I forget someone's name for a second. And all of that is totally, totally normal. You know, forgetting your colleague's name for a second before you're reminded of it. Walking into your kitchen thinking, oh my gosh, what was I doing in here? I do that all the time. Losing our keys, having trouble with change, all of those types of things are normal parts of aging. When it's not normal is when it starts to disrupt our daily life. So forgetting your husband's name, seeing someone that you have known your whole life and not being able to place them in your mind. Forgetting a significant event. So forgetting that you went on vacation last week, or forgetting that you got into a car accident yesterday would not be normal signs of aging. Going for a walk in your neighborhood and getting lost when you've lived there for years and years. Losing things consistently, never really being able to retrace your steps and figure out how to find those things. Or forgetting how to do normal tasks. So, a normal part of aging process might be not knowing how to use your new electronic device. So my example for this is, for this new job, I had to get an iPhone. I'm not an iPhone person, and it took me way too long, way too many meetings that were disrupted to figure out how to actually silence that phone. It was ridiculous. That was kind of a normal thing, though. We all have to adjust. What wouldn't have been normal is if I got up this morning and I wasn't sure, how to brush my teeth, or if I looked at my coffee maker and I didn't remember how to make coffee today. That would be not a normal sign of aging. So we always want to distinguish when it's time to go to the doctor and check in on things and what might just be normal parts of aging. Dementia, most of the time, we're talking about memory loss. That is, when I ask people, what is dementia? We talk about memory, we talk about forgetting, but it's actually so much more than that. It could be losing your train of thought, having trouble concentrating, not being able to finish a task because you really can't concentrate on it. Losing a sense of time and place. So maybe not really knowing the year, not knowing where you are, and also not having a good grasp of how much time has passed. So this is why sometimes we hear people say things like, oh, I haven't had food for hours, or my daughter hasn't visited me in weeks and weeks and weeks, when really it was yesterday, and their sense of time is actually just off. People have trouble communicating, so difficulty finding words, difficulty producing that speech, often issues using nouns. So you might see people describing what they're talking about as opposed to using the actual word. So saying things like, oh, I have bad breath. I need to use the mouth shampoo, right? Coming up with different words to describe things. People start having difficulty with critical thinking or anything that requires that higher level thinking. So trouble with complicated tasks, which often is finances. So issues with finances is one of those big red flags that happens pretty early on. People will lose that impulse control. They start saying things that maybe aren't so nice and normally they would have been able to filter out. And they really lose that ability to assess for safety. So those alarm bells that should be going off in our brain when something isn't right, we should be worried, we should kind of take a step back. Those alarm bells are not working the way that they used to. So when you start noticing people making decisions that are pretty unsafe. People also will have difficulty with depth perception and a loss of peripheral vision. And that's one I think we definitely do not talk about enough related to dementia. People have mood swings, sleep disturbances, even hallucinations and delusions can come with dementia, and then a decline in fine and gross motor skills. So I'm going to stop my share here again and see before we get into communication if there's any questions on dementia overall.
Well, one question that comes up frequently, and I'm sure if it doesn't pop into chat right now, is diagnosis. Is that, and figuring out, is this really dementia, or is it just like, how does somebody figure that out? Because you said yourself, it can be kind of confusing. You begin to think that you're maybe your memory is not normal, but it is.
Yeah, that's a great question, Steve. And I think you always want to start with your doctor because there's a lot of things that can look like dementia that aren't necessarily dementia. So depression can sometimes look a lot like dementia. So that trouble concentrating, that withdrawing, that low energy can actually be symptoms of both depression and dementia. UTI, so a urinary tract infection, can cause delirium, or other types of medical issues like that might present in a way where it does look like dementia, but it's actually very treatable. So we want to make sure we're going to the doctor, we're figuring out that it's not any of those medical issues like that. So the doctor will do some lab tests, they'll do some neurological tests, kind of looking at your cognition, your memory, your balance, all those good things. And look at your family history. Do you have a history of dementia? Because that can come into play for some types. They'll look at your medical history. So do you have any of those diseases or conditions that do increase your risk, like diabetes, stroke? Have you had a head injury that might be contributing to what's going on? So there's a lot of different pieces at play. And I know that going to get that diagnosis can be scary. And especially for people who think, oh, well, dementia can't be treated, so why would I go to the doctor? Remembering that there are so many other conditions that can look like this that are treatable. So you want to make sure you're going.
And it just so happens that Pamela Mills, who's in the audience, because she asked a question, I was at a presentation that she gave a few weeks ago where you also need to make sure that if you're talking to your own internal medicine doctor, that they have some awareness and training in this area, because so ideally the best doctor to get this diagnosis would be a neurologist, correct?
Yeah. And I think, sometimes starting with your primary care doctor can be good, but sometimes you do need to advocate for yourself a little bit. I actually met someone a couple of weeks ago at a training. He was originally diagnosed with depression. And he said, no, I don't think that's right. And he and his wife really had to advocate. And it was Alzheimer's.
Yeah. I'm going to drop into chat if anybody was on the discussion, probably one of the most amazing discussions that we did a couple of weeks ago, about a woman who was in a nursing home, diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, delirium, all these things, lived in the nursing home for 2 years, was placed on hospice. She was going to die. They took her off all of her medications, of which she, at that point, she was on 30. And so they take her off all the medications except for pain medication when you're on hospice. She started to recover, and now she's living independently. And I think another thing that can be that I'm sure that you need to look at here is medications, and having somebody make a thorough evaluation of that. Have you found incidents of that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard of a story quite as amazing
I've
as
never
this
heard
one,
a story like this one.
But for sure, I think medications can play a big piece in someone's behavior and cognition. So always looking at that. And even if they do have the dementia diagnosis, sometimes those medications can cause other symptoms that create other challenges as well. So making sure all of your doctors are talking to each other.
All right. And what I was just about to say, let's get back to the regularly scheduled program. But Leslie says, are there any research studies that are promising towards a cure? Have you heard of anything? I feel like there's news items that pop on the headlines every now and then.
Yeah, I see things every now and then as well, but I don't ever see anything like followed up on them, unfortunately. So I don't know of anything right now. And I think the challenge is that there's so many different types of dementia, and we're still kind of figuring out what causes all of them. And it's, for all of the awesome research people are doing, some of it still seems a little bit of a mystery.
Great.
Yeah, and Pamela says not one cause, not one solution. Yeah,
that's great. All right. Well, and folks, if you feel free to use, if you've got research or things like that, feel free to share that. But let's jump back to the program there, and all right, stuck behind the curtain.
So we'll talk a little bit about communicating with someone living with dementia. So first off, we want to remember that if you have met one person with dementia, you have met just one person with dementia. So people are all different. They're going to be at totally different stages. And people are also so different day to day. So the way somebody's presenting Monday might be completely different to how they are presenting on Tuesday. So we never want to make assumptions about someone's language abilities and how we should communicate with them based solely on that dementia diagnosis. But given that, here are some tips in general for working with someone with dementia and communicating with them. Trying as much as possible not to exclude people from conversations, really making sure we are talking with people, not just about them. I've seen way too many times caregivers or aides talking about the person as if they're not right there next to them. So trying to bring people into the conversations as much as they're able to do that, and giving them a little bit of that power and self-determination back. They're losing a lot of that control over their lives. So the little bits that we can give back to them in their day is really important. Giving people plenty of time to respond. This one is difficult when we're busy and we want to get things done. But they say that people living with dementia need at least, and I've seen a pretty wide range of numbers here, at least 20 seconds to respond. But what happens normally when someone doesn't answer us? We say it again, and most of the time we say it louder, which of course is not very helpful for that person, because first they're trying to process that first set of information, and now you've given them more, and now you've shouted at them. So giving them some time to respond, not interrupting, even if we think we know what they're trying to say and we want to just get it out of them, giving people that space to communicate. Sticking to one topic at a time to avoid confusion. If our thought process is all over the place, they're going to have trouble following that. And using music to connect with folks. We want to really be aware of our body language and our tone of voice. So, people might not know who you are or why you're there or what you're trying to do with them, but they probably are going to pick up on if you are having a bad day, if you're annoyed with them, if you are feeling cranky, you are feeling stressed, or if you're happy to see them, if you are someone who makes them feel calm and makes them feel joy. So really being aware of that when we're working with people, that emotional piece is still very much there. Avoid arguing, criticizing, or correcting folks. So when they're saying things that we know aren't true or talking about things that we know aren't true, it's not the time to correct them. It's not the time to argue. And if you've ever tried to do this, you know that you are never, ever going to win that argument. And we really want to avoid memory questions or quizzing people. I think for those of you in the aging field, you've probably seen people do this where someone comes up to someone and says, "Hey, do you know who I am? What's my name? You know me. Tell me, who am I?" And that can be so hard for people. So we really want to avoid any of those memory questions or any of those quizzing questions. It's going to make the person feel embarrassed. It's going to make them feel stressed. We don't want to put them in that situation. We want to make sure we are speaking slowly and clearly and really avoiding multi-step instructions or multi-step questions. So, saying, "Okay, Mom, why don't you, finish eating breakfast? You can go upstairs and get dressed, meet me in the car, and we're going to go to the doctor." That might be way too many things to give to someone at one time. Depending on where the person is, I might just say, "All right, Mom, why don't you stand up now?" And we're going to go from there piece by piece, as opposed to this big list of things that Mom is not going to remember probably by the time she gets up the stairs. Making sure we're having, as much as possible, one-on-one conversations with people in quiet places. One of the things that happens with dementia is our ability to distinguish between the foreground and the background becomes pretty difficult. So if you are in a crowded restaurant and someone is talking to you, they might have trouble distinguishing between your voice and the people at the next table. We want to always approach the person from the front. So because people are losing that peripheral vision, if we're approaching them from the side or even from the back and immediately touching someone, so immediately touching their shoulder or their head or their hand, that can be pretty startling if they don't see you coming at all. And coming down to their eye level, we want to make sure we're not just, hunkering over people, that we're really coming down to where they're at. So I'm going to stop, and I do see the chat had some things going on here. Wasn't sure if they were questions or comments. Oh, I see it. Some long stuff here. Anything?
Oh, no, that's great. And actually, let's see. Barbara said that she heard there's a blood test for Alzheimer's. I did find a blood test article that just came out a week ago about some blood tests. And then Joan, if everybody wants to read Joan's note there about a program that she's running. And Joan, while you posted that up, I was able to add that to proaging.com. That looks like a wonderful program on technology. Okay, so that was a really great overview. And, I think one of the things that I hear more than anything else is this aggressive, behavior that is sometimes exhibited, and it can be so frustrating for the family caregivers. But one of the things that, when I've been involved in discussions here, is that oftentimes when you look at the situation and look at what you are putting your family member in, and you get as close as possible to their state of mind, all of a sudden their behavior starts to make a lot of sense.
Exactly. Yeah. And I see Barbara put in the chat here, can you explain how mild cognitive impairment can lead to dementia or Alzheimer's? So I'll just address that real quick before we get into challenging behaviors. So mild cognitive impairment is kind of between normal aging and dementia. So there's some level of cognition loss, but it's not significantly impacting someone's daily life. And for some people, they never progress from mild cognitive impairment. So it does not automatically mean you're going to get dementia if you have mild cognitive impairment. And for other people, it does. It might be kind of those beginning stages. And again, there's so many different causes of why that happens that I couldn't necessarily speak to it, but it is kind of that middle ground.
Great. And then, like I was at another presentation. I'm so lucky that I get to go to these because they're such an eye opener. But this was what was interesting. The speaker was talking about how mom was very aggressive and angry towards her, the daughter.
Mm-hmm.
She was living in they brought mom to live with them. And she would get especially aggressive at dinner time. And what they pieced together, that mom, in her mind, she was living in the 1970s when she had these, her husband and her two children. And here is this one, and she would visualize the daughter's husband as being her husband. And here is this woman who is being so friendly to my husband, her daughter. Mm-hmm. And she would get really aggressive with her. And I was like, wow, I mean, that makes perfect sense. But how hard can it be to sort of be the detective and get to that point?
Yeah, and that's actually, be the detective is actually on one of my next slides.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
I'm not jumping the gun. Okay,
so I can go ahead and share that. And that's one of the things. How do we figure out where this person is coming from? And sometimes it's, easier, but really working to reframe how we are viewing these challenging behaviors. And I use challenging behaviors as the term because that's most often what people recognize, but remembering that it's not necessarily them being challenging, it's them really trying to communicate something. So as our ability to verbally use language and communicate that way decreases, people more and more are going to use their behaviors. They're going to act out, whether it's verbally, physically. They're going to start wandering away. They're going to do what they need to do to get their message across or get those needs met or stop feeling that pain or stop feeling that anxiety that they're feeling. And they're going to do that through behaviors. So again, as Steve said, sometimes we do have to be a detective. It is a little bit of a puzzle. So when we're talking about these challenging behaviors, first, we want as much as possible to resist kind of judging the behavior as good or bad, as opposed to, this person is doing something that's bad to this person is doing this thing, and really pausing for a second before we start reacting, before we start putting that label on it or jumping into action or, reacting to them. Because we as caregivers, professional or family members, really have the power to either escalate or de-escalate these situations. So reframing the behavior in our minds, trying to see it in a different way of what is this person really trying to do? And we do have to be that detective of what's going on in their mind. Because, Steve, as you said, people often it makes a lot of sense once we see it from their perspective of what they're trying to do or what need they're trying to get met. So trying to figure that out, is there an emotional need that they have? Is there a physical need? Is there something in the environment that maybe is bothering them? So this is something that we often go through with our families, but thinking about, okay, what is the behavior first off? What is going on that is causing this challenge? Is it wandering? Is it aggression? Is it agitation? Is it shadowing the caregiver? And then looking first, okay, is it harmful? Is it dangerous? Is it actually putting this person at risk or somebody else at risk? Or is it actually kind of just annoying? Is it just a little bit bothersome? And then what happened right before? Did something potentially trigger this behavior? What happened right before, mom started getting really agitated or really anxious? What happened right before, dad left the house and decided to walk 5 miles to the store? And then what happened immediately after? So what is the consequence of that behavior? For example, maybe this person has been able to put together a little bit, when I act this way, X, Y, or Z happens. So this behavior is their way to get X, Y, or Z. So figuring out what is the consequence of the behavior. And could the person be in pain? Are they just not able to tell you? Is the water too cold in the shower? Are they experiencing some sort of infection? Could something be related to medications? And then trying to really get in their head of what that person might be feeling or might be thinking. So I have some case examples here just to look at the way we can reframe this idea. So we have Mary. She gets upset and aggressive with her husband. She calls him names. She attacks him. She calls 911. Mary is really difficult to care for. But let's dig a little bit deeper into Mary. Let's kind of reframe how we're viewing the situation. Mary's first husband was actually physically abusive, and she's reliving that trauma now, and she's confusing her current husband with her first husband. So instead of thinking of Mary as being really difficult to care for or really aggressive, thinking of Mary as a survivor. Mary is trying to keep herself safe. She might view her children as still young. Maybe she's trying to keep them safe. So what can we do as caregivers? What can her current husband do to help Mary feel safe in that situation? Another example might be John. So John paces around his assisted living home. He makes noise. He's jingling keys. He's opening up doors, closing drawers, moving furniture, sometimes flipping them over. He's always tinkering with stuff. And he can't be left alone. And he's annoying all the other residents and the staff. Well, let's get to know John a little bit more and kind of get into his mind. John was actually formerly a handyman. And he's looking for ways to be useful. He's trying to fix things. He's on a mission. He's tactile. He wants to touch things. He wants to figure out what's going on and see how things work and hopefully make them better. He's not trying to annoy everybody else around him. So how can the assisted living help John feel useful in a safe way, or in a way that maybe isn't as bothersome to the other residents? Can they give him, like one of those little fidget pads, or give him a tool set that he's able to use in a specific area? So just reframing the way we're viewing these behaviors can be really powerful. And, there's no one way to respond to these challenges, but one is remembering that we really have the power to de-escalate. And it doesn't always seem like it in the situation. And it's easy to get upset when somebody else is upset and to kind of come onto that level. But remembering that if we are positive and we are calm and we are reassuring, we do have that power to de-escalate. Limiting distractions from people, sometimes that can just be really overwhelming, having a lot of noise. Or looking at what else is in the environment, what might be triggering some of these behaviors in the environment. We all have things that annoy us. I know my mom hates those, that dinging when you don't have your seatbelt on in the car. It just drives her crazy. And if she wasn't able to verbally express that, at some point she gets there or that happens, she would probably get aggressive or anxious or express that in a different way. So we have to think, okay, what could be bothering this person, big or small, in the environment? Ruling out pain, ruling out infection or medication issues, So if your loved one or the person that you're caring for has a drastic change in their behaviors, that it might be an infection, it might be a medication issue. It might be a urinary tract infection that's causing that big change. Trying a relaxing activity, using a weighted blanket, maybe painting. I know that's something that our dementia specialists have done with people before. Having a pet there or one of those animatronic pets can be great. Just kind of redirecting them from the thing that they're focusing on. That's the problem. And I know this one is much easier said than done, especially if we are related to the person and we have a past history with them, but not taking their words personally. Remembering that this is the disease talking. This is not mom. This is not dad. This is not husband. This is not wife. This is the disease. And those nasty, hurtful words are coming from there. And we also want to remember that just as much as rhythm and music is retained in our brain, that is also the same place that curse words and bad words and sex talk and racial slurs are stored. So sometimes those words are actually coming out just because that person is able to pull that word when they weren't able to pull another vocabulary word. When someone's confused, we want to provide brief explanations, not overwhelm them with information, not bring up things that we think might be upsetting. For example, dad recently moved in with you. He keeps getting confused on why he's there and where he is and what's going on, where is his house. And if we say something like, Dad, don't you remember you moved in here with us when mom died? You've been here for 4 years now. That's a lot of information for dad to get in that moment and potentially be hearing the news of his wife's death in his mind for the very first time. So it could just be, yeah, we really wanted you to move in with us. We wanted you to be part of the family and we're so happy that you're here. So providing those brief explanations, making sure that we're not arguing, correcting, or convincing people. Talked about that one already, along with the not asking memory questions or quizzing, or quizzing people, because that can just cause more agitation. If someone is having repetitive behavior, so constantly asking you when something's going to happen or what day it is, sometimes having memory aids can be helpful. So a whiteboard that has the answers to some of those questions. A visual depiction of what to do in the bathroom. I was somewhere recently where they had this and it showed you come in, you pull your pants down, you sit down, you go to the bathroom, you stand up, and it went through all of that in photos for someone who might walk in there and think, oh gosh, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do in here. I don't know how to use the bathroom anymore. We know that sometimes people's reflections can be really triggering for them. They see the reflection, they don't recognize themselves anymore, and they think, oh no, someone's in the house with me or someone's in the bathroom with me, which could be even more upsetting. So covering up those mirrors, covering up windows might be helpful if that person's having that challenge. If someone is wandering a lot, leaving the house, figuring out why they're wandering can be helpful. Do they have a purpose? Are they headed somewhere? Sometimes people are headed to work or headed home or headed to pick their kids up. Or sometimes they're just walking. They're just bored and they want to get out and they want to get that energy out. So they're headed for a walk and don't realize, it's 2 a.m. and it's not safe. So figuring out that purpose, having locks, door alarms, tracking bracelets, or filling up their day with more activity so they don't have that chance to go out and get bored and feel like they need to leave. So these are just some of the things that we talk about in our program in terms of responding to challenges. So I see the chat has been going as I've been talking, so I'm going to stop here and see if anybody had any questions.
Let's see what we got here. We got, is a sundowner a form of dementia, and is it usually treated only with medication?
That's a good question. So sundowning is actually, for lack of a better word, phenomenon that happens with dementia. So it's referring to the issue that a lot of people have as the sun goes down, as it gets darker in the day, their confusion often increases. There's a lot of different theories on why this happens. Sometimes people say it's because of the light changes and people aren't able to visually orient themselves anymore. I've heard other people say it has to do with medication and that it's like so long since they took, the last set of medication. So it really depends on the person and why it's happening. But I hear from a lot of families that towards the end of the day, towards nighttime, that's when things get really difficult. And yeah, Pamela says it could also be a stress response. Absolutely. A lot of people, of all ages experience anxiety more at night. So that can be something that's going on as well.
And I think, that again, based on, hearing you speak and Pamela and some of the other experts speak, that while sundowning and people get irritated at a certain time of the day in the afternoon, this could happen anytime during the day.
Yeah.
You can track it. So sort of maybe keeping a notebook and keeping track of, at 11 o'clock, mom gets irritated and agitated. And that could be a remedy there, that, or at least you're expected. And I think, as somebody said, Sharon said, sometimes it's best to walk away out of sight for a few minutes, then start the conversation over again. Mom gets irritated, it's sort of, that may be one of the solutions there, is just to walk away and let things simmer down.
Yeah, absolutely. Making sure that you're taking care of yourself and giving yourself that little bit of time to breathe and be able to come into that conversation more rationally and in a good state of mind. But Steve, you mentioned tracking, and that's something that we definitely do with folks that we work with, encouraging them to track the behavior, track the activity. And it doesn't always illuminate everything perfectly, but a lot of times it does, helping to figure out, okay, what's actually happening right before. And, one of the things that our clinical team talks about sometimes is someone who was getting really agitated in the assisted living, and they realized it was the cleaning floor, like one of those big buffering machines. And it was happening every time this went by. And that was what was triggering her. So, that was more of a simple solution than some of them are, but figuring out those triggers.
Yeah. And Louis Tenenbaum has a great question here, a series of questions. What's the importance of daily and household routines? What's the impact when you break those routines? And you could, again, see where that could agitate somebody.
Yeah. Having a routine can be really, really helpful for people it reduces anxiety, kind of helps them orient themselves as much as possible. We see pretty big declines generally when people move or when there's a big break from that routine. And that can be hard for caregivers too, because they can't have every single day look exactly the same. So knowing that is not always possible, but having some level of routine can be really helpful.
And, along these lines, something that happened to one of my neighbors not too long ago was his wife had to go to the hospital, and she was getting a procedure, and, he drove her there, and then he had to leave for 5 hours and come there. The doctor said, the medical staff said, come back in 5 hours. And so he left the hospital and he got lost. And what they determined is he and his wife were always in the car together, like removing her from the car, and the guidance that they supported each other. It's pretty scary, to think that is making an impact like that, but it sort of is in alignment with some of the things that we're talking about, routines and disruption and things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of, if you remember in school, they said if you study in the same environment that you're going to take the test, that actually helps you. And so I think we've had this our whole lives, and it just really becomes heightened when we have other issues.
Yeah. Man, as usual, I'm looking at the clock and we're almost to the top of the hour. So I want to make sure if there's anything that closing thoughts or anything that you wanted to make sure to let the group know about. I'm definitely going to get your information. It will be at the link on there, and I'm dropping into chat right now your contact info and your email. And I see that we had another thing that happens is that if I say that we're done,
you get more questions. Yes.
And Wita says supporting families and educating them is so important for everyone to be on the same page in their delicate approaches to ensure everyone is the same level of understanding. Wita, I think one of the things, and you probably encounter this, Sydney, is that I see this as you've got primary caregivers and you got one loved one who is, there in the house every day. And then, the sibling flies into town to sort of rescue that stressed out caregiver. And now it just gets chaotic because that new person introduced to the situation doesn't understand the routines and things of that nature.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that. We've worked with a couple of families where there's multiple family members, some are far away, some are close, and those dynamics can be really difficult. It can be challenging, one, just understanding the disease and understanding this person, but also, they've all been family and related and had their own challenges way before any of this. So those dynamics can also come into play. And I think for all of us, planning so we can kind of know who do we want that person to be if we ever needed it to make those decisions for us can be really helpful, because those family dynamics can get really messy.
And I know that the memory care communities are really tuned in on this because that's their focus and they're focused on it. But you can see where, let's say that somebody is developing dementia and they are in a traditional independent living or an assisted living community, and not necessarily the memory care section, where the revolving door of caregivers can be extremely disruptive.
Yeah, absolutely. And it might be hard for that diagnosis to get there soon enough. All right. Sometimes people know that these changes are happening in their brains and sometimes they don't. And if there's not somebody else to kind of look out for them, that can be hard to notice the changes, okay, Mary used to be able to do this. Now Mary can't. Maybe something's going on.
Yeah. Well, Sydney, this is awesome. And I am really thrilled that there's a free program for support out there in Virginia. And I hope that this program is replicated all over the country. Folks, reach out to Sydney if you are in Northern Virginia and you or your clients need support. But then if you're from another state and you want to connect and find out how, as you said, yours program was an inspiration from one in, was it Minnesota or
Kansas?
Kansas. Okay. And so let's see if we can get this going. And Wita says 100%, and we're always more than happy to offer them the same education we get for our siblings. Oh yeah, I'm glad that Wita brings up the virtual dementia tour, because I remember when I took that virtual dementia tour, there's some criticism to the virtual dementia tour because it's highly unlikely that any of all the things that it replicates are going to happen to any one person at one given time. It's also one of these things that can be viewed sort of as ageist, is that it's like, wait a second, I lose mobility, I've got all this, I lose my eyesight, and but the thing that I love about the virtual dementia tour is that when I was doing it, I was somewhat babbling incoherently because I was trying to complete these tasks with these noises and the lack of vision and some pains in my hands and arms. And it made me much more appreciative to not only when I go to a memory care community, but let's say that I'm in a city and there's a homeless person who is, babbling incoherently, to understand we just can't see cognitive and mental health disorders.
Yeah, I mean, our team also does that training for folks if anyone is interested, and it really does illuminate what people are doing. We see people, pacing back and forth or kind of talking to themselves. And then when you go through that training, you think, okay, that makes sense. I walked around that room 5 times trying to remember what to do, or it really illuminates a lot of those behaviors. And you're right there, there's definitely criticisms of it, but I think the ultimate goal of increasing empathy for folks is there.
And empathy is really what we need.
Exactly.
Here, especially loved ones. It's a lot easier when you're visiting a community and you see somebody, and actually it can sometimes be, what I found is that there's something about living life, as long as when folks aren't angry, when they're living life without filters, and there's something creative about it. But if that was my loved one, I wouldn't be taking, it would be much more difficult to take that.
Yes.
And Pamela says it does a good job of representing how the body and mind is compromised when distracted or unable to give attention to full functioning. Yeah. So, all right. Well, this has been amazing. Sydney, hats off to you and your team and everybody in the audience. I just love it when y'all participate like you do and ask questions and make comments. I'll have this recording up later today, and we'll create a podcast as well. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you everyone for joining. And we are here always with any questions or consultations that you might need.
I love it. Bye.
Thank you.